Feeding cherry shrimp seems to be one of the most misunderstood parts of the hobby. So many shrimp keepers aren't sure what they should feed their shrimp, or how often, or how much they should feed them. By the time you get to the end of this video, you will be a shrimp feeding pro. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Richard and I'm the owner of shrimpkeeper.co.uk. So why do so many people struggle when it comes to feeding their shrimp? I think it all stems from the misconception that shrimp are scavengers. Whilst it is true that in the wild they have evolved to make a living eating just about anything they come across, this means that in their natural environment they actually get a fantastically varied diet. They don't just scavenge for whatever they can find, they eat whatever comes their way. And whilst the detail is nuanced, there is a difference between scavenging and not being picky about what they eat. Shrimp in the wild get a massively varied diet, and it can be tricky for us hobbyists to recreate that, especially if we're just going to leave them to scavenge whatever they can find in our tanks. In the wild, they would not only eat biofilm and algae, but also decaying plant matter and any animals or insects that fell into the water. They'd consume seeds and nuts, they'd eat fruits, they'd eat pollen that fell from the trees. Pretty much anything that comes their way, they would eat. And this variety gives them access to a complete range of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. And that's what we need to recreate if we want our shrimp to be bright and colourful and breed and to molt well and to live as long as they possibly can. Now, very few of us can recreate their natural diet in our aquariums. Certainly, I very rarely chuck in a handful of dead fish or a collection of bugs that I found outside, or some fruit or some nuts. But what we can do is make sure our shrimp do get a complete array of vitamins and minerals and nutrients by feeding them a balanced, varied diet. So let's start by looking at what our shrimp should be eating. And in my opinion, there are essentially three pillars to the cherry shrimp's diet. There's the natural food, there's the staple food, and there's the complementary food. And it's our job to make sure our shrimp have access to all three. And let's break them down. Now, natural food is, as the name suggests, anything that might occur naturally in our aquariums. And that includes biofilm, that includes algae, that includes microscopic crustaceans that naturally form, that naturally live in our aquariums when we set them up correctly. Now, the great news is to provide our shrimp sufficient natural food, all we have to do is set their aquariums up in the right way and give them time. When I set up my orange cherry shrimp and my blue velvet tank down here, I set them up several weeks before I added the shrimp. And yes, after several weeks, did they look terrible? Absolutely. But they were crammed full of different algae. They were crammed full of biofilm. No doubt there was masses and masses of microscopic life, all of which meant when I added my shrimp, they got to work straight away. Within minutes of being added to the tank, every single shrimp was picking at leaves, picking at the substrate, picking at the glass, clambering all over the rocks that were covered in algae. Now, you don't have to make your tank a complete algae mess. At the moment, pretty much every tank in here needs a service. I clean the algae off the front glass. I don't clean it off the sides or the rocks. I don't clean it off the wood or the filter. Because all of that algae, all of that biofilm that we're developing, that is what the shrimp love. And that's what they want to be picking at, essentially 24/7. Whenever you observe your shrimp, you'll notice they're constantly, that's them picking at the starts of algae. That's them picking at biofilm. Providing you set your tank up properly from the start and you give it time before you add your shrimp, algae and biofilm and microscopic crustaceans will all just arrive naturally. You don't have to do anything. And that's fabulous. Now let's look at the second pillar in our trio, which is a staple food. In my opinion, as a hobby, we massively underfeed our shrimp. Every single day, I'll speak to someone who will battle me and say, Richard, I don't feed my shrimp. I never feed my shrimp. They're scavengers. They're detrivores. They can eat the algae. They just eat biofilm. Absolutely fine. If that's what you want to do, not a problem at all. But for me, when it comes to growing large colonies, when it comes to producing lots of babies, when it comes to producing shrimp that molt well and are generally healthy and have fabulous colours, to my mind, that is all because I feed them regularly with a good quality, balanced food. Now, personally, at the moment, I'm largely feeding Spirulina Complete, which is one of my own foods, but I spent months researching shrimp foods, and this was by far the best one I came across, which is why I decided to release it. It's called Spirulina Complete because it has a large quantity of spirulina algae. It also has krill and gramaris and other crustaceans, all of which help boost our shrimp's colour. It has vegetable matter and fruits. And again, as I mentioned at the start, these are things that our shrimp would come across in the wild. We don't, generally speaking, chuck a handful of fruit in, or certainly I don't. But something like Spirulina Complete contains fruit, and that helps our shrimp get all of those nutrients, all of those vitamins and minerals that they would get in their wild diet. Of course, you don't have to feed this food. In fact, this is only available in the UK. If you live in the States, then maybe you choose something else. If you live in Europe, maybe you pick a food that is available there. Essentially, whatever you choose should have a wide range of ingredients that help recreate what our shrimp would eat in the wild. And then we move on to the third pillar in our trio, and that is complementary foods. And complementary foods are foods that you wouldn't necessarily feed every single day, but you might feed once or twice a week. Bloodworm, frozen bloodworm would be a complementary food. I don't feed my shrimp frozen bloodworm every single day, but I do try and give it to them at least once a week. I also feed something like stinging nettle pellets. Stinging nettle pellets are high in calcium. They're fabulous for helping our shrimp build strong exoskeletons. They're fabulous for helping our shrimp molt and to stay healthy. A complementary food is something that you give once or maybe twice a week that goes alongside your main food. It goes alongside your staple food, and it goes alongside the natural food in your aquarium. Now, if you do live in the UK and you want to get your hands on any of these foods, then head to the shrimpkeeper.co.uk website and use the code SKA10 to save 10% on all of these foods. If you live in the US or Canada, then in the description below, I'll put a link to Andy from Shrimply Canadian's Etsy store, where he sells a wide range of shrimp foods. And again, enter the code SKA10 and get 10% off of his foods as well. So once we've decided what we're going to feed our shrimp, we need to decide how much we're going to feed them and how often they're going to feed them. Let's first tackle how much, because how much is pretty easy. You want to feed your shrimp as much as they will consume within a few hours of you adding the food. And that will vary depending on what food you give them. I'm a big fan of Repashy gel food, and I love feeding Repashy gel food because it stays stable in the water for 24, 36, or even more hours. In that case, you want to feed them as much as they'll consume in about 24 to 36 hours. And how much you put in will also vary depending on how many shrimp you have. Down here in the yellow cherry shrimp, for instance, I started off with half a dozen shrimp. Then I might put in a couple of small pieces of food. They are breeding rapidly. That colony is exploding, and they'll soon be available for sale on my website because they're breeding so quickly. So now, as the colony grows, I increase the amount of food I add. I now put 2 or 3 Spirulina Complete tablets in there every time I feed them. And of course, there are other foods like Snowflake pellets. Snowflake pellets are a complementary food that you could feed your shrimp once or maybe twice a week, which is made of soybean hulls, and that doesn't degrade very quickly at all. In fact, any uneaten food in the water develops biofilm, and that in itself can become a fabulous food source for your shrimp. You almost want that food to last for a day or two so that it does start to form natural biofilm. If you're not sure how much to feed your shrimp, all you need to do is add a little bit. If they eat it really quickly, then next time you feed them, add a little bit more. If when you've put food in, it's still sitting there the next day and you think, oh, they've gone off, it's gone a bit manky, next time you feed them, put in a bit less. Most people within a week or two should be able to work out how much they should feed their shrimp purely by trial and error. How much I feed my colony will be different to how much you feed your colony because we have a different number of shrimp. We have different size shrimp. We might be feeding different food. We might feed them at different frequencies. There is no one size fits all. You need to work out how much to feed your shrimp based on how much your shrimp eat in the first few hours of you feeding them. Now, before we move on to how often we should feed our shrimp, one little tip I'd like to share with you all is to use these little glass feeding dishes. When I was testing dozens and dozens of different foods to find one that I liked, one that was good enough to release as my own shrimp food, I essentially ended up creating myself a problem because I had a booming colony of detritus worms. I was putting in so much food that I almost had more detritus worms than I did shrimp. So now I'm moving all of my tanks over to these glass dishes. And the great thing is, when you put the food in, almost no matter how much you put in, it stays in the glass dish. It doesn't break down and sink into your substrate, which makes it incredibly easy to monitor how much your shrimp are eating. And it also makes it, if they don't eat it and you need to get a hose and suck it out, it makes it super simple. I think tip of the day has got to be use these glass feeding dishes. And again, with the code SKA10, if you're in the UK, you can order these from my website and save yourself 10%. Definitely worth adding. So the final question is, how often should we feed our shrimp? And if you do some research on the internet, you will find everything from never to me, which is pretty much every single day. I feed my shrimp almost every single day. Now, if you take a minute to look in the comments, I guarantee someone will battle me on that. Someone will say, you shouldn't feed them every day. You should feed them once a week. You should feed them twice a week. You shouldn't be feeding more than once a month. You know what? The great thing is, your colony of shrimp, you can feed as how often. That don't make sense, did it? The great thing is, your colony of shrimp, you can decide how often you want to feed them. I probably feed mine 5 or 6 times a week because typically there'll be a day where I'm out or I'm busy or I got back from work late and I didn't even come in here. But that's okay because typically there'll be plenty of biofilm or plenty of algae and plenty of other things for our shrimp to eat. Now, if you've got a small colony, if you've only got 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 shrimp perhaps, then maybe feeding them every day gets a bit much. They don't consume it all. But if, like me, you end up with a black rose tank here where there's 300 or 400 shrimp in there, if I don't feed them every day, then how do I know every single shrimp got some food? Because when I drop the food in, that food will quickly become covered in shrimp, which means not every shrimp can get to it. Much like when it comes to working out how much to feed your shrimp, working out how often to feed your shrimp, if you're putting food in every day and some days they're just not interested, they walk off or they have a sniff and they go, nah, that's not for me, then maybe your colony wants to be fed every other day. Maybe every 3rd day is right for your colony. You'll typically only find the answer with trial and error. But don't worry about what anybody else says. Just because your buddy says never feed your shrimp, or someone you like on the forum says once a week maximum, or even me saying feed them almost every day. Work out what works best for your schedule and your shrimp, and that is how often you should feed them. And you can work out how much you can feed them. And make sure you set up your tank so there is plenty of algae and biofilm, and make sure whatever you feed them is a complete food that has a wide range of vitamins and minerals and nutrients for your shrimp, and they'll be absolutely fine. In my experience, feeding your shrimp is one of the keys to getting a big, colourful, healthy colony of shrimp that you almost have so many shrimp you don't know what to do with. And if you want to find out more about one of the best foods to feed your shrimp, then definitely watch this video next. Thanks for watching.